Hey there, this is Jexy with the Systems Alliance, and in this video, we're going to go over the news that Microsoft finished 2018 and began 2019 as the world's most valuable company. Now, this has not been a distinction that Microsoft has held since 2002. You have to go all the way back then, and obviously, in part of this, although Microsoft did have a great year, Apple has been absolutely cratering. But one of the things that's been helping Microsoft along, a new thing this year that actually got some notice from the CFO and the CEO up above, is that their gaming division is the biggest it's ever been, grossing over $10 billion in revenue. So to start off, we obviously have to address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the broader sell-off in the market. The NASDAQ has fallen 20% in that time. The S&P is down over 6% for the entire year. So obviously this is something that is affecting every company out there, or at least it's affecting some of the companies out there. So Microsoft, for instance, it hasn't been nearly as affected as, say, other companies. I know we talked about Activision Blizzard being down over 40%, Electronic Arts being down almost 50%. You know, these are companies that have certain practices that have led them to that road, and if there's someone down there, that means there's others who aren't falling as far. To start off, I think we have to talk about Apple. Now, Apple was once valued over $1 trillion, something that no company had ever hit before, just a massive, massive total. But taking a look at it, 63% of Apple's revenue came from the sales of the Apple iPhone. And so you could argue, yeah, part of the reason why they ended up being worth $1 trillion at one point was because Apple iPhone sales are off the charts, or rather were off the charts. But the problem is, if so much of your business, if almost 2/3 of your business is derived from the sale of a single product, well, what happens when that product doesn't do so well anymore? What happens when it starts getting banned in Germany? Qualcomm just won a lawsuit against them, and now iPhones are banned in Germany, a huge country, not just in general for population, but for the purchase of iPhones. What happens when you thought you were going to sell your phones really well in China, but then you're not selling your phones well in China? I remember looking at stories probably earlier in the year, and you saw these Apple stores being opened up in Beijing and all across the place, and the store is full of workers, no customers, absolutely empty. And when you're selling a phone for $1,000 and you keep on selling the same phone with just minor upgrades every time, people start to realize, one, it's not worth it. Their new phone is simply not worth $1,000 to most people. And two, their old phone is good enough. You know, for everything you need your phone for, the old phones are generally good enough. You know, at this point, it's not like your phone can be so much faster, you know, when you're browsing the web or anything, because that's still reliant on the grid that we have currently. You know, they want to go to 5G and all this other stuff, but generally the actual reception and everything you're getting on your phone, the wireless, everything, it's still not that fast. You can still do pretty much everything faster on a computer. So if you don't have that to fall back on, you're just upgrading the camera a little bit more. But here's the thing, Android phones, generally, whether it's Samsung or someone else, even a Windows phone, you know, even a few years ago, they have better cameras than the iPhone and just a better overall system than the iPhone. So iPhone, obviously, they relied on marketing, but also you have to worry about, well, what happens when everyone already has a smartphone? You know, they're selling a lot of these phones in emerging markets and trying to break in China and everything like that. But now people are starting to talk about, we've reached this cell phone peak. You know, once everyone has a cell phone, you can't sell in any new markets. You know, it becomes like, oh, what's in every market? Food? The price for food isn't skyrocketing like, say, the price for phones. So, I mean, you reach that saturation and the market's full up. They don't need your product anymore. They might want your product eventually, you know, like a car or something like that, but they don't need it anymore. It's not something new to them. It's just, oh, okay, when I upgrade, I upgrade. Same thing actually happened with car sales for a while. You know, they were going up and up and up, and then everyone who needed a new car had a new car. And so sales started to go down and down and down. And it's kind of like, well, what did you expect? So, of course, because of this, Apple lowered their expectations for 2019 in terms of revenue, sales, everything like that. And it's all due to the iPhone. Now, you know, they're blaming China. it looks like now they can blame Germany. But they really only have themselves to blame because, hey, if you don't make a product good enough that people want, people just won't buy it. But as I talk about Apple not being diversified enough to handle one of their segments going down, specifically the iPhone, Microsoft is a lot more diversified in comparison. And this is one of the reasons that they've been doing well. And there's also a difference. I mean, you don't want to be too diversified in a company. Like, you don't want to end up like General Electric and be a conglomerate and not have control over any of the things that you do and then end up falling apart because you got your hands in too many things and then now you can't control anything and you do all of them poorly. That's not focused. But Microsoft has 3 major divisions, and each of the divisions has roughly a third of their total revenue. Productivity and business processes represents about $36 billion of revenue for Microsoft, and that's about just under 33% of their total revenue. Intelligent Cloud represents just over 29% of their revenue, and that's coming in at over $32 billion. And more personal computing represents about 38% of their revenue, and that's coming in at over $42 billion. So as you can see, each of them is holding their own, and they're leaders in every single one of their segments too. So that's also key. So looking into the future, what should you buy? Should you buy some Apple? Should you buy Microsoft? Well, Apple's outlook for the next 2 years is only about 4% growth. So not something that you really go after. It's definitely more of a hold stock. You just hold on to it. That's what it is. Microsoft, however, is looking more like a growth stock, and they're expecting double-digit results in both of the next 2 years for growth. So things are looking definitely better for Microsoft than they are for Apple in terms of their outlook in the future. And even though those are the estimates, to be honest, I believe those estimates for Apple came out before the crash in China and before the crash in Germany. So you may not even be looking at a growth stock at all. Sure, it's Apple, you still trust them to do something, but let's be honest. I don't think Tim Cook, their CEO, has done much of anything since he took over. And really, Apple as a whole hasn't done anything since Steve Jobs left. So, they used to be an innovator coming out with new products. Now they just come out with new versions of the same product. Obviously, a lot of people are waiting for that next big thing, but I'm not sure it's here yet for them. And obviously, their outlook reflects that. So if you're patient, hold on to Apple. But if you're less patient or just want to make some money, seems like Microsoft is a good buy right now. People say the PC is dead, but Microsoft is seeing growth there. So is it really? I mean, they're seeing growth there both in Windows and their Surface device. So things seem to be going well there. Gaming is huge right now, and Microsoft, of course, has the Xbox and the PC. And with the cloud, Microsoft is absolutely killing it. In the third quarter of 2018, they actually had more growth than Google, Amazon, IBM, and Alibaba. So Microsoft doing really well with Azure there. The Surface is approaching $5 billion revenue. LinkedIn is past $5 billion revenue. And gaming has passed $10 billion revenue. So just for comparison, Sony, who obviously is having one of their best years of all time with the sales of the PS4, all of their hit games like God of War and Spider-Man, everything like that, they're at $19 billion. So Microsoft doing pretty well for itself considering it pretty much had no hit games this year. Couple that with the fact that they've been selling far fewer Xboxes, but the thing with that, the PS4, the best and fastest selling console in history. So in comparison, Xbox doesn't look so hot, but in comparison to history, Xbox is actually doing really well. I know for the first part of the release of the Xbox One, it was the second fastest selling game console in history, just to the PS4. So things are looking interesting going into the future. So the S&P 500 and NASDAQ for the year were down about 6%, but Microsoft was up almost 19% in comparison. And during this last massive sell-off, Microsoft was only down 11%, about half as much as the NASDAQ. And when you compare it to other companies like, say, Apple was down 30% during the quarter. Amazon was down 25%. And each of them have their own reasons for being down. You talk about, why is Activision Blizzard down? Why is EA down? Oh, it's the market. No, it's not just the market, because other companies aren't down the same way. They're down because people just don't believe them anymore because of their business practices, because of the products that they have, how they're doing it, the direction they're going, everything like that. Microsoft is on the other end. So you average all the companies together, of course, yeah, you get that around 20% in a quarter. But to end the year positive for Microsoft, that's a huge deal. And not just below positive, 19%. I mean, that is a huge gain. And some analysts even think that by the end of 2019, Microsoft can be worth $1 trillion. Now, me personally, I don't see that, but maybe by the end of 2020, especially when you talk about inflation, sure, why not? I mean, they're on their way there, and they're diversified enough that I don't see anything that could really stop them. So before I go into Microsoft and their gaming division, Apple, they have a few questions to answer. They've reached the point where people simply aren't upgrading their phones anymore. You know, it's not worth it. And they used to hide the fact, like, oh, my phone's slowing down, why? Well, turns out it was because of the battery. And Apple had to come clean and admit that, and now people are just replacing their batteries and their phone is like new. So their golden goose is pretty much cooked in that aspect. No pun intended for Tim Cook. But their business model has always been sell things at the highest possible markup, higher than anything else, and see if that works. And it's been working up until now. And finally, the people as a whole are catching on to what many have already said, it's not worth it. So when you think about markups, you know, a really high markup, what product has a really high markup? Well, the product I think of is diamonds. So when you look at a mall, the number one, or what used to be the number one markup in any store was Tiffany's. So I mean, diamonds are a ripoff already. We already know that, and the market's showing that right now. But then you go exclusive diamonds or whatever, Tiffany's was your provider of that. And Tiffany's was the highest markup, and for a while actually now is the number two, because an Apple store is the number one store in any mall for the highest markup. So think about that. You know that diamonds are a ripoff. That's something that you can research online anywhere. But the fact that Apple has a higher markup than even diamonds, that shows you, I mean, I'm not going to say the word, but you can determine if it's a ripoff or not. But obviously a lot of people have, and that's why they're flocking to other phones like Android. And with Android, a lot of times you get a better phone, more performance, better camera, better everything, more features for less price. And that's something that Apple is finally having to start to really compete with. Now, the thing for them, will they release a lower cost phone? Is that something that they're going to do? Are they going to go the cheap route and start flooding the market with phones that are reasonably priced? We'll just have to see. It's one thing if you're the top dog and you have the best phone out there, everything like that, and then you can release a cheaper version of it. The problem with Apple is that they don't come from a place of strength. They don't have the best phone out there. So if they're going to release a cheaper version of it, is it still going to be overpriced versus other cheap phones that you can buy from Samsung? So going back to Microsoft and their gaming division, Phil Spencer, who now heads up Xbox, obviously he's kind of a hero in the gaming world, not because of anything he's done that's been revolutionary, but the fact that he took over from someone else who was killing them. I mean, you talk about the reasons why Sony is doing so well, why the PS4 is doing so well, and why the Xbox One is doing well, but not nearly what it should, considering a lot of people could argue it won last generation's console race. It's because of how the Xbox One launched. Do you remember that it had to have the Kinect with it? What a terrible idea that was. It was just a complete debacle. The price was too high. It had to have the Kinect. People just didn't want it, and it didn't sell. It was going to have no backwards compatibility. All this anti-consumer practices that we think of, you know, an EA or an Activision doing, Microsoft was doing. They got rid of him. Phil Spencer came in, reversed all of those. They've acquired 7 new studios this year to produce games for them. That was the other thing that they used to do with the 360, and by the end of the 360 cycle and into the Xbox One, they didn't have any exclusives left. Sony had all the good exclusives. I remember back in the day, people bought an Xbox 360 because it had Halo, you know, it had Gears of War, it had Mass Effect. You know, a lot of people forget that that was exclusive to Xbox, and that's something they definitely should have kept. But also, you know, they have Fable, you know, they have Forza, they have all these great things. And how many of those games have you seen on the Xbox One that have been huge hits? Gears of War? I guess some of the Forza ones have done okay, but it takes time to rebuild that, and Phil Spencer's doing that. But one thing recently, he's finally on the radar of Microsoft's CFO, Amy Hood, and she says that's a good thing, you know, and he says, well, now they're actually paying attention to me, and it's because they've passed the 10 billion in revenue mark. So now they're worth paying attention to. Although it's crazy to think you have to pass 10 billion for someone to pay attention to you. Only in Microsoft or Google or Amazon, one of those companies, would you have to do that much to get someone to pay attention to you. But they managed to do it. And of course, one of the things that Microsoft is going to do in the future is cloud-based gaming. I mean, they have Azure. They already have the cloud. So put all the processing power into the cloud and all you have to do is stream the game. That's something that they really want to try and do. So who knows? Is that the future of gaming? Maybe, especially in places where it's difficult to game otherwise. But it does seem like a step in the right direction in terms of diversification, as opposed to just relying on things like loot boxes to bring in all of your money, because that doesn't seem like a great long-term prospect. Mobile gaming, fine, everyone's going to get into it, but don't make that your main focus, because you're going to lose all of your fans. So let me know your thoughts about all of this. What do you think about Microsoft becoming the most valuable company in the world? And what do you think about how their gaming division feeds into that? What are your thoughts on Apple and it just not losing the crown, but really cratering past when it used to be over $1 trillion? Do you think they can recover? Are they going to put out anything new that people want? Let me know your thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Twitter, and we'll catch you later.